most renowned Baroque orchestras in Europe. She teaches viola da gamba at the Conservatory of L'Aquila and gives workshops in historical improvisation. She's been working for many years to reconstruct the historical pedagogy of improvisation for cello and viola da gamba. Her articles and critical editions have been published by Brepols, Sedem, Studi Musicali, and so forth. She's taken part in numerous recordings, which won numerous awards, garnering considerable personal critical acclaim. In the book that was published by Morabito about 10 years ago on historical improvisation, published with Brepols, there's actually an article by Giovanna on the violoncellista partimentista, where you can also find an article by John Lutterman on the elements of improvisation that he got through his analysis of the cello suites of Bach. So these two speakers of today have very important articles in that publication. I think it was published between 6 and 10 years ago. I'm not exactly sure when. So let's try to launch the video, and ideally she will take a break from her recording and try to join us for a few questions at 12:20, because her presentations is exactly 12 minutes, so we should be able to have her if we have questions for her.
Good morning. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to present my work about the continuo on the cello in Baroque Italy, on which I have been working for many years. I would like to thank in particular Mark van Schielkijk for his kind invitation and all colleagues and participants for their kind attention. Unfortunately, since I cannot even be online with you today, I recorded my presentation. I share my presentation now. Here we are. Yes. The main points I will deal with are performing the bass line, just the bass or not, specific partimenti for cello, Rocco Greco's manuscripts, the basso continuo and Agazzari's definitions, the art of accompaniment and the old meaning of accompaniment, examples of counterpoint realizations from the repertoire, examples of new realizations on the cello. Just the bass or not, low strings such as cello or viola da gamba are included in the continuo section, like other instruments in a low register, such as bassoon or violone, and polyphonic instruments like keyboards, lutes, guitar, or harps. We all know that the continuo has the task of playing the bass line. Usually, polyphonic instruments add chords to the bass line, while generally it's not clear yet whether low strings and other melodic bass instruments can or must add something, and eventually what. Like today, Baroque cellists could show their best skills in solo pieces, but biographical details witness that they played much in ensemble. So we might ask ourselves whether they also use their skills in the performance of the continuo, and if so, how. Some concert reviews of the past witness extraordinary performances by cellists. For example, Rocco Greco was celebrated as the best player nowadays in Naples, acclaimed as such by all the music virtuosi. A true legend was Francesco Alborea. Quantz, who saw him in Naples in 1725, described him as an incomparable violoncellist, and Benda wrote that he had heard the famous royal violoncellist Franceschelli in Vienna. About Alborea, we have another report, unfortunately not from a direct witness. Francesco Saverio Gemignani reported to Burney that he saw Franceschello in accompanying Nicolini in Rome in a cantata composed by Alessandro Scarlatti for the violoncello. The composer, who was at the harpsichord, said it was an angel who had assumed the figure of Franceschello. So far did his performance surpass all that Scarlatti had conceived in composing the cantata, or imagined possible for mankind to express. As a matter of fact, Gemignani's testimony about Alborea refers to a group performance of vocal music with Alborea at the continuo, probably with an obbligato part. The phrase, his performance surpassed all that Scarlatti had conceived in composing the cantata or imagined possible, could mean that Alborea played his own diminutions and passages instead of those composed by Scarlatti, as all that astonishment could prove. A further element for reconstructing the improvisation practice on the cello while accompanying vocal music is given to us by Giovanni Moroncini's aria Sì ch'io vorrei morire from Serse. There are two sources for this aria. One is the score of Serse, the other is a collection of arias by Moroncini located in the Paris National Library. As we see in the images, at the beginning of Serse's score there is a beautiful cello solo, while in the Paris manuscript there is only a very simple continuo that could be completed with any instrumental part. The difference between these two sources could indicate that it was common practice to add a part above a simple continuo bass line, and that many solutions were possible. The basso continuo, indeed, was born as a shorthand notation for polyphonic pieces. It was useful, as players had to read only one line instead of the many included in the score, all in different clavs. But in the 17th century, not everyone thought that the best way to perform was reading the basso continuo. For example, Adriano Banchieri writes in Conclusioni del suono dell'organo. There are two groups of players: organ players, that is, those playing the good scores, spartiture, and fantasia. Other bass players, bassisti, who, driven by such laziness, will be happy to play only just the bass. We understand here that Banchieri considers playing only the bass line a lazy performance, while a good performance includes other parts above the bass, specifically the parts included in the score or spartitura. In many pedagogical sources and in many original realizations for keyboard, numbers are realized with chords, which could be defined as an idiomatic realization for keyboards. This is the most often used solution in today's practice on keyboards, but not on low strings. We'll see later on what appears to correspond to an idiomatic writing for a melodic bass. In recent years, many studies have been dedicated to partimenti, exercises aimed at developing compositional and improvisation skills on the bass. Important sources for cello are Rocco Greco's works. We have two sources: the manuscript Partimenti di Rocco Greco, 33-3, located in the library of the Conservatorio di Musica San Pietro Maiella, Naples, and the manuscript MS2D13 in the library of the Abbey of Monte Cassino. Detailed information about these sources can be found in the article I wrote in 2022 together with Catherine Ban, which is forthcoming, and in Guido Olivieri's article, The Origins of Cello. The manuscript of Greco are Partimenti, which in the first part contains 6 antiphons, 12 figured partimenti, and 15 unfigured partimenti, and in the second part has 114 solfeggi. In the Monte Cassino manuscript, 11 antiphons and 28 sonate a due viole. The first part, of the Neapolitan Partimenti, is a partial copy of Greco diminished antiphons, included in the Monte Cassino manuscript, which is entirely dedicated to the cello. We see here left page 1 of Partimenti, and right page 96 of the Monte Cassino manuscript. It's very different from what we would expect today. There are no chords, instead we see very virtuosic, quick passages, diminutions or arpeggios, in which the first note is almost always the same as the bass. We see here the second page on which the bass is diminished by arpeggios. And here we find a simple counterpoint of the first note on the bass. We see that it includes only unisons and octaves. With today's words and concepts, we would define these partimenti as diminutions on the bass, but we have to reflect on the fact that at the time they were called, that is, they were considered partimenti for cello, and that today we would call these realisations. It's a very different way of thinking how to add something on a bass line. Today we would not add more parts sharing the same simple line, but diminished in different ways. On the contrary, instead, in the Baroque period, this was common practice, as it is found, for example, in most operas. Often violins and voices share the same line, but with different diminutions, a technique called today heterophony. As an example here is an aria from Riccardo Broschi's Merope. The same happens in many Baroque compositions with an obbligato bass, which mostly diminishes the same notes as the basso continuo. Like here, we have here two examples from Fontana and Marula. If cellists contributed to the continuo by adding diminutions to the bass, it's fundamentally important to find sources describing this practice. We can find some significant help in Agostino Agazzari's Del sonare sopra il basso. First, instruments are to be divided according to our topic, so that we will divide them into two classes. That is, one class as fundament and the other as ornament. As fundament are all those instruments that support all the parts, such as organ or harpsichord, and, in case of only a few voices, lute or harp. As ornament are those instruments that, joking and counterpointing, make the harmony more pleasant and sonorous, that is, lute, guitar, violin, lirone, harp, and similar instruments. It's interesting that some instruments are included in both groups, such as harp and lute, and that viola and lirone belong to the ornament group. The logic of the division seems to be not the texture, as lirone and violin have opposite ranges. Instead, it seems to be the possibility or not of playing all parts together, which is called by Agazzari contenere perfetta armonia di parti. Indeed, we have to clarify a possible misunderstanding, as some words still in use had previously a different meaning, like the term armonia, which in English is harmony. When we read armonia, today we immediately think to chords. In 16,000, however, armonia was defined in a different way, and throughout the 18th century. In 1774, Antonio Ximeno writes, just a moment, yes. Armonia means usually a combination of sounds that is pleasant to the ear. In a melody of a single voice, the harmony is following. If instead sounds are put together, harmony is simultaneous. And he explains the meaning of perfect harmony, the combination of four sounds forming third, fifth, and octave. It is customary to edit the epithet of perfect. In these old definitions, harmony indicates a general beauty of the music, and the whole composition is considered from the point of view of the many voices, not of the sequence of chords. In my opinion, this is a very important point, as today some of the main difficulties in understanding the old continuo practice on the cello are related to the very different concept of harmony of today. With this different meaning of the term harmony, which was related to the various parts of the polyphonic texture, the function of the melodic bass through the violone or viola is clearly described by Agazzari to add diminutions to the score or to make counterpoint, as at that time counterpoint was strictly related to diminutions. Agazzari adds more points. Fundament instrument, if there are many voices, they have to play full suonare pieno, but if there are a few, they have to use a few consonancies. The fundament instruments hold still tenor and harmony. They have to play the bass as it stays. Instead, ornament instruments have to diminish with beautiful counterpoints. They have to compose new parts and new diminutions. We notice that the description of the instrument's task is opposite to what usually happens today, as today's keyboards improvise while bass strings hold still the original bass line. As Agazzari writes in 1607, the violoncello is not included among the instruments of the concerto, but we find the term viola, which could be related to the various 8-foot instruments of the time. If cellists were supposed to add a part to the bass, this should have been the goal of a specific training. We know the partimenti were exercises to train composition and improvisation on the bass. Various partimento sources have the word accompaniment in the title, such as, for example, Giovanni Paisiello's Regole per ben accompagnare il partimento, ossia il basso fondamentale. Paisiello's title shows that the term partimento refers to the fundamental bass. Therefore, Paisiello's title could be translated Rules for well accompanying the fundamental bass or partimento. But we have to analyze what accompanying means. Today, when we think to the term accompaniment, we usually think to a lower bass part supporting a higher melody, but in many early sources, like Paisiello's Regole, the verb to accompany is referring to the bass line. An articulated definition of accompaniment is given by Thomas Busby in his dictionary 1801. Accompaniment, a separate instrumental part added to any composition by way of embellishing the piece for the end of enriching the effect. Accompaniments are those instrumental parts in a composition which do not include the principal or principals, but which are added to relieve them, to supply the necessary chasm, fill up the harmony, decorate and variegate the motivo, and heighten the general effect. The old meaning of the term to accompany is also shown by the numerous scores for keyboard accompanied by strings. What today we often describe in an opposite manner, sonatas for the solo string with accompaniment of a keyboard. Summing up, the art of partimento was the art of adding instrumental parts above the bass, supporting the principal part, and embellishing the whole music. This could be done by cellists, diminishing the bass line and or adding a new counterpoint above it. Now we see some examples from scores both of vocal and instrumental music in which there is a second line added in the bass staff. This does not happen often, but only in a few places, like some good suggested solutions. Here we have Alessandro Stadella, arie Udite amanti from cantate 6 a sola voce di soprano o di contralto con basso continuo. And we see a second line, an upper second line in the bass. Here we have Alessandro Scarlatti, aria Mentre affidano al mar di Cupido from the same collection. And we see also here a second line added on the bass. Here we have Giacomo Carissimi, Vir frugi et pater familias, in Mottetti, second book. And here Giovanni Battista Mazzaferrata, il primo libro delle sonate a due violini, bassetto di viola se piace e basso continuo. In this composition there is an ad libitum part for cello, which doubles the continuo for most of the time, but in some places it adds passages in thirds with a violin or imitations. In my opinion, what we have seen are examples of how an Italian cellist performs the continuo in the Baroque, when someone is already playing the continuo on harpsichord, for example. If instead in the continuo there is only the cello, first we have to consider what the function of the continuo is. That is, simple or diminished bass or basso cantante. When the bass is a simple continuo, probably cellists added different kinds of accompaniments, instrumental figurations or figures or motifs, imitation, or parallel motion in thirds and sixths. In the repertoire, instrumental figurations were used in obbligato passages, but we can suppose that they were used also to realize the bass. If the continuo includes only the cello, the note of the original bass must always be played on the beat. And now these are two short examples of how I added an accompaniment of a second cello above the bass in Supriani's studio in A major adagio. We see in the variation A1 that there are some notes added to the original bass, bridges, parallel thirds, and imitations. And here we have two spots in Supriani's Sonata number 5. The continuo is harpsichord plus cello. I added a new cello part with parallel thirds and imitations. More could be said, but we would need much more time for today. I will keep it at this. Thank you. And